Welcome to Daily Variety, your daily dose of news and analysis for entertainment industry insiders. It's Tuesday, September 2nd, 2025. I'm your host, Cynthia Littleton. I am co-editor-in-chief of Variety alongside Ramin Satuda. I'm in LA, he's in New York, and Variety has reporters around the world covering the business of entertainment. In today's episode, we'll talk with Brent Lang, Variety's executive editor, as the curtain falls on another summer box office season. And Variety chief film critic Peter Debruge weighs in from 9,000 feet at the close of the Telluride Film Festival. He talks about the early reaction to Bruce biopic Deliver Me From Nowhere and other titles making waves in the Colorado mountains. Before we get to that, here are a few headlines just in this morning that you need to know. Call of Duty is coming to the big screen. Paramount has struck a mega deal with Microsoft's Activision to develop the video game franchise as a movie. Paramount CEO David Ellison says in the release that he is, quote, a lifelong fan of Call of Duty, end quote. It's a new era for the Melrose lot. The Television Academy will honor the Corporation for Public Broadcasting with its annual Governor's Award this year. This is the equivalent of giving an Emmy nomination to a show that just got canceled. Please look up my interview with former CPB chair Bruce Raymer last month for a look at what the end of the CPB will mean for PBS, NPR, and other public media. Director Catherine Bigelow has a lot to say about the need for nuclear disarmament. It may seem like a quaint Cold War-era concern, but she aims to sound the alarm about this ongoing issue with her new movie, A House of Dynamite. She spoke about it in Venice on Monday. You can find all of those stories and so much more on Variety.com right now. Now we turn to conversations with Variety journalists about news and trends in show business. If it's Monday, we're talking box office. Brent Lang joins us to explain the summer-long box office tally. This year's haul is on par with summer 2024, and that's not a great thing because this year's slate was so much more robust. And we talk about why Weapons was the sleeper of the summer. Brent Lang, putting the labor in Labor Day, thank you so much for joining us and doing box office.
Thanks for having me.
Well, as the curtain comes down on another summer box office season, it's been an eventful year, a lot of swings, a lot of new titles, old franchises being revisited, a few sleeper hits. I want to talk about the summer total box office tally, but first let's talk about this weekend. The summer sleeper has been Weapons, the Warner Brothers horror thriller movie that rocketed back up to the #1 spot this week.
Absolutely. And its fourth weekend of release, it made $12.8 million. It's made over $200 million globally, which is a pretty phenomenal return on a movie that costs $38 million. Going into the summer, I don't think a lot of people knew much about this movie. Something is happening with the horror genre, which has been a very dependable one for Hollywood. You're seeing some taste change a little bit because Blumhouse, which had been kind of the tastemaker, they did a sequel to Megan 2.0 that really bombed. And I think they're having some difficulty figuring out whether or not their low budget model is working as well at a time when stuff like Weapons and Sinners, which are a little bit higher budget and a little more prestige-y with casts like Julia Garner and Josh Brolin and Michael B. Jordan starring in these movies. I think that people are looking maybe for something that's a little more auteur-y or something.
It's an interesting point that horror has become so popular that you are seeing bigger names come into the genre. And it's also interesting to see this in week 4 come back to #1. That is as hard as evidence as you can find that there's word of mouth on this movie. People wanted to check it out.
That's definitely true. Unfortunately, the counter to that argument is that there's also not as much competition and not as much compelling stuff out there. And when you look at this weekend, you had 2 new films, The Roses and Caught Stealing, and they ended up falling short of the 50th anniversary re-release of Jaws. That's not really a sign of a very healthy marketplace.
The shark still has some serious bite. Sorry, I couldn't physically stop myself from making that joke. But Brent, certainly for Caught Stealing, it was not for lack of trying from star Austin Butler. He was everywhere. He did his part to sell this movie for director Darren Aronofsky and Sony Pictures. Were there any glimmers of hope, any regional pockets of strength for this movie?
I think this is somewhat of a disappointment. Under Tom Rothman, Sony has done a pretty good job of still taking bets on original films. But while they do that, they have been very conservative with their budget. So Caught Stealing cost about $40 million. I can't imagine it's going to make a profit theatrically, but that's not a ton of money to bet on something like this.
And I would imagine, too, the Austin Butler factor of it. He has such a fandom that as this hits streaming, it could be the kind of thing that didn't do much at the box office, but played on cable forever, the modern equivalent of that.
There was some hope that he had been such a phenomenon in Elvis and did the Dune sequel that this would spill over and that his name above the title would be enough to get people to turn out and force.
The Roses, obviously the reviews were pretty tepid. What do you think went wrong here?
It was a property that didn't have the kind of affection that people thought. It's based on a novel, which then inspired a 1989 film with Kathleen Turner and Michael Douglas and Danny DeVito. And for something like this to work, you need the reviews to be great. And the reviews were meh. And frankly, I love Benedict Cumberbatch. We did a cover story on him, and he's a fantastic actor, and Olivia Colman's a great actress. It just didn't look like something that people had to go out and see on opening weekend. That's a real issue. Again, same thing with Caught Stealing. But there's a lot of stuff on streaming that's available and have to have a need to see, and it didn't have it.
So let's talk summer overall. Where does summer 2025 land, do you think?
Well, unfortunately, it's basically flat with summer 2024, and that's at about $3.67 billion. And that's pretty disappointing because going into the summer, there was an expectation that the slate was very strong, that there were a lot of returning franchises. You had 2 Marvel movies, you had Superman, you had a Jurassic World film, and that you would actually be able to hit or even eclipse 4 billion. And the last time we did that was 23, where you had Barbenheimer. What's happening is that Hollywood has seen a declining interest in some of its more venerable franchises, and that's a problem. You're seeing some tastes that are really shifting. Heading into this summer, the idea that Lilo and Stitch would be the year's biggest hit, or that Weapons would be a big hit, or that Jurassic World would end up outgrossing Superman and Fantastic Four. I don't think anybody would have predicted that. So that indicates to me that the comic book genre in particular is really fading in popularity. They still get a certain level of audience, and they still have a very core group of passionate fans, but it's not performing like 5 years ago.
I know that the box office experts such as Rebecca Rubin, who you are once again substituting for as she's busy on the Lido and covering the heck out of the Venice Film Festival. I know that you all study these numbers. There's a lot to be learned from the summer. Brent, thank you for taking the time to talk through all this.
Thanks for having me.
And now here's Peter Debruge to set the scene and the mood at the Telluride Film Festival this year. Bruce Springsteen, competing Hamlet movies, another Yorgos Lanthimos Emma Stone collaboration, and E. Jean Carroll. Telluride had a little something for everyone this year. Peter Debruge, Variety's chief film critic, coming to us from nearly 9,000 feet in Telluride, Colorado. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks, Cynthia. This is my favorite festival in the state.
Listeners, I wish you could see his smile. Peter is in his happy place with smart people talking about interesting movies, narrative movies, documentary movies. This is a heady festival, and I always enjoy reading our coverage over Labor Day weekend. Tell me, Peter, what's the mood, what's the vibe of Telluride this year?
Well, in general, Telluride's a special place because it really is this elitist little bubble. It takes a lot of money to come here, and the people who do aren't necessarily film professionals. They're people who make Telluride their cultural weekend for the year. They binge on movies that are going to be the best of the year. Telluride has a much smaller, very carefully curated program from other festivals, maybe 40 major movies with some tinier things on the side. And so you can rest assured that almost everything here is going to be good, because they don't have to do the thing that a festival like Berlin or Toronto does with nearly 200 titles. They're the best of Cannes, they're the best of Berlin, they're world premieres. They share some movies with the Venice Film Festival where the movie might world premiere a day before and then show up for its very next stop.
One of the movies at Telluride making a lot of headlines is the documentary about E. Jean Carroll, the writer who has been through an odyssey with President Donald Trump. And this movie is also at Telluride shopping for distribution because it's an extremely controversial topic.
My colleague Matt Donnelly found out in his interview with E. Jean Carroll, it sounds like this movie may have been available for several months to other festivals, and Telluride's the first one had the nerve to premiere it. And we'll see whether distribution follows. It'll take a gutsy company to stand behind this. But it's interesting here in general, there's been a transition in recent years from Tom Luddy, who was one of the founders of Telluride, to his successor, Julie Hunsinger. Julie's really embraced documentaries and nonfiction storytelling. And I really think that's reflective of a transition we're seeing in the world right now where audiences are too.
It's best of times, worst of times for documentaries right now because there has been such a boom. The streamers came in with a lot of money, a lot of commissions, but documentary industry insiders who gathered at Variety and Rolling Stone's Truth Seekers event in New York just a couple of weeks ago were very much sounding the alarm. The gusher of money that fueled so many careers and so many projects has really slowed down. Let's get to the big narrative titles that everybody was watching. From my perspective, the biggest had to be the Bruce Springsteen biopic, Deliver Me From Nowhere, Jeremy Allen White, 20th Century Studios. What did you think?
Music biopics are my least favorite genres. And I always joke that it's the same story always. This blessedly is not that narrative. Scott Cooper, the director, has taken a book that's very specifically about the making of the Nebraska album. This was a really key moment in Bruce Springsteen's career. I think people are really focused on whether Jeremy Allen White can do such an iconic performance. That's what really interests people about Portraits of Musicians. He's really terrific. It's tricky because Springsteen doesn't seem like such a hard person to capture. He's kind of so all-American, you feel like there are probably 20 actors who could play him. But is there a single one besides Jeremy Allen White who could sing the songs where I thought I was listening to Springsteen?
Well, I can tell you this. I am old enough to remember when that album came out, it was a big deal because you had one of the biggest rock stars who was about to hit the stratosphere with Born in the USA just a few years later. It was very, very critical of the Reagan Revolution. It was just a couple years in, and Ronald Reagan could not have been more popular as a president. And here was Bruce Springsteen saying, hey, some of the things that are happening in our farmland and in the heartland of America is not so cool. Another title that had a premiere, Begonia from Yorgos Lanthimos. Once again, Oscar talk for Emma Stone. I know his movies are very hard to describe. Is this going to be a mainstream breakthrough film for Lanthimos?
Well, Lanthimos is a real provocateur. He's the director who brought us Poor Things and The Favorite, The Lobster, etc. This is a remake of a Korean movie called Save the Green Planet. Here, you have Emma Stone playing the CEO of a major chemical company who's kidnapped by two cretins from Middle America. They believe she's from an alien planet and they're trying to torture her into a confession. It's very disturbing, but it also has a texture. You know, Cynthia, that I just came back from Little Rock, Arkansas. I grew up in Waco, Texas. I know the type of people that we're seeing depicted here. And to have a Greek director nail something that so seldom I see captured by Hollywood, I thought was part of the thing that made this so powerful.
Right now, we need our provocateurs. And then, as I understand, Peter, you had a surfeit of Hamlet movies at Telluride this year.
It's a funny thing that film festival programmers do. They seem to like it when the movie titles rhyme. There were two movies called Dreams in competition at Berlin Year. There are three Hamlet movies at Telluride. One is a straight-up adaptation, contemporary, starring Riz Ahmed. There's another movie that Chloe Zhao, who brought us The Rider and Nomadland, she reached into the deepest part of her soul and pulled out this movie. The movie's about the loss of Shakespeare's son, named Hamnet, and the impact that has on the parents. Jessie Buckley is just astonishing. It really is a cathartic experience for the audience to watch. I'm giving myself goosebumps remembering what it felt like to be in that room. The third one is a very tiny documentary with Oscar Isaac, who is here for Guillermo del Toro's Frankenstein, kind of a sneak peek, but he also played Hamlet on stage and at the same time in his private life was experiencing profound tragedy. In the park where they do these conversations, they had all the Hamlets on stage, including Ethan Hawke, who played in Michael Amoretta's Hamlet years ago, trading notes on what it was like to play the Danish prince.
It's Telluride's spin on Shakespeare in the Park. Peter, thank you for being our reporter, our critic, for posting all those reviews and being our guide here to what Telluride is all about. Safe travels to you down the mountain.
Thank you, Cynthia. This is really the starting pistol for an exciting season that's ahead.
As we close out today's episode, here's a few things we're watching for. Variety is busy producing extra print and digital editions at the Venice Film Festival, which runs through Saturday, September 6th, and will be all over the Toronto Film Festival starting Thursday, also with dedicated digital and print dailies. If that wasn't enough, we're also doing digital dailies this week out of Le Havre, France, for the Rendez-vous de Unifrance market for French movies and TV shows. It's the start of prestige fall film season, and there's also a boatload of new TV series coming soon. Thursday brings the highly anticipated spin-off NCIS Tony and Ziva to Paramount Plus, and The Paper premieres on Peacock. Before we go, congrats to Megan Colligan. She's joined Row K Entertainment, a new theatrical distribution label backed by Media Capital Technologies. Colligan was previously president of IMAX Entertainment and president of worldwide marketing and distribution at Paramount Pictures. Brent Lang had the scoop on this new venture last week. Thanks for listening. This episode was written and reported by me, Cynthia Littleton, with contributions from Brent Lang and Peter Debruge. It was edited by Aaron Greenwald. Sticks, Nicks, Hick Picks. Please leave us a review at the podcast platform of your choice, and please tune in tomorrow for another episode of Daily Variety.